VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are chilling at the June 23rd edition, 5 weeks away from training camp. That schedule was released. There'll be 14 sessions, 2 extra joint sessions this year. If it feels like training camp is longer this year, it's because of those against these Titans and Cardinals. There's two extra ones, and it spans about 4 weeks this year. So what we're going to talk about today, the final episode of the week, is they're items that have seemed to change or to flip. Theories that you held perhaps in April and early May that now seem to be walked back, whether it's through guys and gals like me, Vikings quotes from players, or on-the-field stuff at OTAs or training camp. So there's 7 of them, and if you already knew the inevitability, the thing that's flipped, good for you. But for the masses, I'm lifting up stuff that we kind of thought that is now changed a little bit. And the first one, I would say, at least per what draft stock would be considered, I would say not so fast on Lewis Cine as a starter. Now, this guy, and I think you would love to see that man emerge this summer at training camp and preseason and become the starting free safety because he was Kwesi Adofo-Mensa's first draft pick, for God's sake. He better emerge at some point. But I think when he was progressing so well through the broken leg injuries, recovering from it, I should say, we all kind of thought, all right, well, he's going to be back sooner than later, and boom, finally, it'll be an outlier that he didn't start last year. Well, this summer, it sounds like a lot of the good positive things being said about safeties are about Josh Metellus and Cameron Bynum. So I think what we're setting up is, once again, Lewis Cine having to battle for a starting job that he may not necessarily win. Of course, they can hide behind the guise of, oh, well, yeah, he just broke his leg. He needs time to get reacclimated to the speed of the game, and that's fine and believable. But at some point, Lewis Cine has to start. Otherwise, there's a little bit of panic about whether or not this new regime can draft the right players, albeit it was Kwesi Adofo-Mensa's first draft. But I think there was a lot of sentiment around the draft. It's like, yeah, we're going to get Cine back. This defense is going to be ferocious with Brian Flores. But I don't think it's guaranteed that Cine is going to start. Josh Metellus is really standing out. Kwesi Adofo-Mensa called Metellus the unsung hero of the team on some dude's podcast. And then Cameron Bynum started every single defensive snap last year. So I think you're having a 3-way battle on the way for those that's not guaranteed to be won by Mr. Cine. That's number 1, and I should say, per usual, these aren't ranked in any order, just off the cuff. Number 2 is in the same sentiment about that 2022 NFL draft. It's a Caleb Evans, at least now. We still got to see a full training camp and a lot of preseason. Evans might be the other starting cornerback. Thor Nystrom was on this show earlier this week. I asked him who was going to be that guy next to Byron Murphy as guaranteed startable commodities, and he pretty straightforwardly said, I think it'll be Evans. And perhaps it won't be Booth. Now, Booth falls in the exact same camp as the speech I just gave about Lewis Cine. Now, Booth was a second rounder and Cine was a first rounder, so there's a little wiggle room. But if it's Evans over Booth, then what for Andrew Booth? Will it just be that, well, Evans is really good and therefore Booth has to battle to eventually get defensive snaps? I don't know. I would rather see Booth emerge because he was a second rounder and he was the guy that Kwesi traded up for. But if he's not ready or flat out Evans is better, then who's to say that it shouldn't just be Evans? But just like we said about Cine in February, March, April, even May, well, Cine's going to be back. And then, Booth is going to be healthy. And these guys that got early round draft stock, they should start. I don't know that either one, right now anyhow, is certainly put in ink on a depth chart. If they're starting on a depth chart, it's in lead, it's in pencil, because it can be erased at any moment. Right now, I would consider Evans the front runner to start if he can get his concussions, poop in a group. So both, that's 1 and 2. No guarantees on Cine, no guarantees on Booth, although there's still a lot of summer to play out, and we shall see if they gain starting jobs. The next one is no extension for Kirk Cousins. If you're a Kirk truther or flat out ready to move on after 5 years and soon to be 6, you have your off-ramp to the Kirk Cousins experience. The first time documented in the last 5 years that Kirk Cousins hasn't been under contract for more than 1 year at this time in the calendar is right now. Through their actions, not necessarily their words, but through their actions, Kirk Cousins is scheduled to be a free agent next year. Of course, they can revisit the conversation next February or March about an extension, and we shall see how 2023 plays out, because if Cousins is phenomenal and the Vikings make a deep playoff push, then of course you'd probably want him back for another year or two. That would be his age 36 season in 2024, and then obviously henceforth 37 in the following year. But right now, per Cousins' words, somebody asked him at minicamp about the contract, and he said, "You know what? We're gonna chat about that next March." I don't know if he used his usual "I have to earn." That's what he usually says. I got to earn the right to play here. But I think based on the way that Kirk very plainly said, well, "We're going to talk about the contract next year," that all extension fodder is gone for this summer. You're going to have a real contract year, Kirk, and thankfully for his sake, he'll have offensive line continuity and play caller continuity for the first time since 2016 in Sean McVay. But we didn't know that. Back in April or May, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah had said that we came to a spot in the extension talks where sometimes in negotiations you just say, let's talk later. Well, later is not going to be this summer unless Kirk got his wires crossed. Later is going to be free agency next year, or at least leading up to it. Number 4, kind of along the lines of Scene and Booth, it's KJ Osborne versus Jordan Addison. Now, Addison also has the precious first-round draft stock. He's also the freshest draft thing in your memory. Vikings could have chose a defensive player in the first round of April's draft, but they said, no thanks. We're going to get really, really rich on offense, and we want Addison. Well, I polled Vikings Twitter, about who they expect to be the WR2 out of the gate in September, and like 68% of fans, you guys and gals, said it's going to be Osborne, not Addison. And that's news to me, because I think perhaps we're jaded about, rookies starting out of the gate. Mike Zimmer didn't usually allow it. I don't know if that's the same gig for Kevin O'Connell's Vikings. So I expect Addison to have a real strong puncher's chance to win WR2. But according to the rest of yous and, Osborne's body of work, I think the sentiment, or at least the theory, is that it's going to be Osborne at WR2 at least to start the 2023 season, and then we shall see what happens. However, if I would have asked everybody on draft night, who's going to start at WR2, you'd probably all say Addison because you're all jacked and excited about it. But Addison missed about half of OTAs and then all of mandatory minicamp because of some minor injury, and they insist he'll be back at training camp. So we'll have to tell then if he's got the oomph to supplant Osborne as WR2. But for the way that folks, the court of public opinion, they think it's going to be Osborne at WR2 next to Addison, and then perhaps thereafter Addison slowly or progressively gains his WR2 snaps. He's just like the rest of these guys, Scene and Booth. Addison's got to be a WR2 at some point. Otherwise, there was a major problem with the draft. The next one was also talked about by Thor Nystrom on this very show. Was we had this epiphany, like league worldwide, Vikings fandom wide, that Josh Oliver, the new tight end, he's got a TE2 next to his name on the Vikings depth chart. We all looked around. We're like, oh, this guy can catch. And if you followed the 2019 NFL draft, you knew the lead up to that Oliver was a pass catcher. Well, then he got immersed in the Ravens system, which is all about run, 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 or at least it was during the beginning of the Lamar experience. We shall see with all these weapons they added if they throw the ball more and a new offensive coordinator. But out of mere survival to make the roster, to get on the field to play, Josh Oliver had to develop into a run-blocking tight end. That was not his skills, his MO, his skill set at all coming into the NFL. In fact, most scouting reports said, this guy isn't much of a run blocker, but damn, he's athletic and he can catch the thing. Well, somewhere in the last 4 years, we've decided he's the opposite. We don't know if he can really catch the ball, but he's certainly a good run blocker for those Ravens. So ideally, he'll blend both worlds for the Vikings. And although TJ Hawkinson will get most of the targets, there's always a chance Hawkinson misses a game or a couple games because of injury. And then bada bing, you'd have Oliver who's ready to do both. I think the lesson learned, the theory that has been flipped, is that Oliver isn't just a run blocker. We said that because he came from the Ravens and that was his forte. But as a college standout, he was much more of a pass catcher than he could have ever dreamed of becoming via run blocking. So remember that about Oliver. He's not a one-trick pony. Just because he came from the Ravens doesn't mean he can't catch the ball. Winding down the list and the show, Alexander Mattison. We've said for pretty much since Mattison was re-signed in March that, the Vikings are going to have a running back by committee. I'll maintain that's probably on the way, or at least it will feel more like a committee than we've seen since Adrian Peterson was drafted. But the way that Kevin O'Connell has talked about Madison, it sounds like Madison is going to be a Dalvin replacement in that he doesn't need to come off the field all the time, or that this committee that a lot of teams use where it's like equitable carry loads between 2 or 3 guys, I don't know that that is a sure thing for the Vikings. I think it will be Madison with about 55, 60, 65% of the snaps, and then whoever they decide is the other guy, Dwayne McBride, Kene Iwangu, or Ty Chandler, then, like Madison used to do, he'll mop up. He'll get his drive. He'll come in on the goal line from time to time. So this one still remains to be seen because it would make a lot more sense that the Vikings would indeed have a running back by committee, only because they have 4 dudes that are... They're not big-name running backs, but at least they're not just like, imbeciles who aren't going to get any carries. Alexander Madison, Ty Chandler, Kene Iwangu, and Dwayne McBride are all running backs that in a pinch can, take a workload and excel. At least that's how they've done in the past. And so I think because there's so much depth in the running back room, we've assumed that there's going to be this grand committee where everybody gets their piece of the pie. And the Vikings' words in the last month have said, well, no, this is Madison as the RB1, and we shall see what happens with the other guys. And then finally, this one's kind of a little bit of a Hail Mary, but I got to bring it up again, is Jaquelin Roy from LSU. He got first-team snaps at minicamp. And the guy is from the 5th round, and usually defensive tackles that are selected that late in the draft are developmental projects, so that if you look up at Vikings football in 2025 and Jaquelin Roy is playing, we'll be like, oh, well, yeah, that draft pick worked out. He shouldn't be running with the first team this early. So I think that should get your wheels spinning that perhaps they really liked him in the draft, and when he fell to round 5, they were going like this. And it's the only thing that would explain why he was getting at least some snaps with the first teamers. I think the other explanation is that Dalvin Tomlinson's out of the way. He signed a huge deal with the Browns, and at Roy's spot right now, it's really just Khyiris Tonga, who we hope can have another sequel to the flash-in-the-pan season last year, where he emerged and nobody knew who he was at this time last year. So because the inside of the Vikings defensive line, Harrison Phillips is pretty much solidified, and then Dean Lowry has a starter's resume, he'll probably start, it kind of leaves Tonga in the middle there, and you're like, is he going to start? Well, Jaquelin Roy is getting a little action, so I think based on the way the roster was constructed 6 weeks ago, you probably said Tonga, he's the guy, they like him. But when Roy shows up and starts getting some action at that spot, then you never know. It could be an honest-to-goodness camp battle. All right, I will be back, Monday to go over the next item of Vikings football. I think Alec Lewis from The Athletic is going to join sometime next week or the week thereafter. And we shall go from there. Talk to Josh Fry next Wednesday. Skol, baby.